When you talk about growth in fintech, there aren't many success stories bigger than Revolut. But their journey to 40 million customers started with one marketing hire, my guest today, who took the company from 0 customers to over 10 million.
I've interviewed thousands of marketers over the years, and I'm always looking for that wild person that's just, yeah, of course, I know the playbooks and I know the importance of data, but let me tell you about these fucking mental ideas I have. And that's what I really live for when I speak to a marketer, and it is so rare.
Chad West led marketing at Revolut for nearly 5 years, and he now advises early-stage CMOs and is the VP of marketing at crypto platform Argent. If you're a marketer and you're working in fintech, I can't think of anyone better placed to learn from when it comes to scaling a business. In our conversation, you'll hear what makes a good marketer, the tactics he used to scale Revolut at each phase of their growth, and the biggest mistake he made as a CMO. All that and more coming up with Chad. Hi, Chad. Thanks for joining me.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, when we caught up before, I remember coming away thinking it was actually quite nostalgic because I was remembering what fintech was like back in the good old days, 2016, 2017, and I was following every move that you were making at Revolut and what the team at Monzo were doing. How's it for you now?
Yeah, it's I get quite teary when I think back to 2016, 2017, because it's like you said, that's when fintech was cool. And I think if we're being brutally honest, it's not as cool anymore, right? It's safe and it's standard. So no, I think it's good. I think it's kind of nice to look back and kind of remember how things used to be, but it's also quite refreshing just to see how a lot of these companies are now mature and growing and becoming, these sort of main players. And on one hand, it's kind of a bit of an achievement as well, because I remember, and you will too, back in 2016, 17, that everyone sort of laughed at fintech. No bankers took fintech seriously, and Revolut was a joke, and Monzo was a joke. And it's just now quite refreshing to see that wasn't the case, right? We kind of knew it wasn't, but to see it happening now with Revolut with 40 million customers and being global and being profitable and all these things that weren't possible. So
yeah, it's wild when you look back, and now they're genuine, real businesses.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to start with then is what it was like at the beginning. You joined Revolut when it had a handful of customers, and you took them on that growth journey through to 12 million customers. Tell me the story of how you ended up there. Like, what drew you to Revolut?
Yeah, honestly, it's just a bit of like luck and a bit random, really. I mean, I had already been working in the tech industry for a couple of years at Rocket Internet, so was working on some ecosystem platforms there. So well versed in the technology industry, but fintech was becoming this thing, right? Everyone sort of knew about it. You had Monzo with these eyes these cards that turned your eyes blind. You had TransferWise employees running naked down the street, and I was like, what is this thing? And a fun story a lot of people don't know is I actually applied to all three. I actually applied to Monzo, TransferWise, and Revolut back then.
Really?
I did, and Revolut was the one I had no idea what it was. No one did. Everyone kind of knew Monzo and knew TransferWise because they were kind of making a bit of noise in the scene, and Revolut was this sort of unsung sort of hero just tucked away. And I ended up canceling interviews at both Monzo and TransferWise because I interviewed at Revolut first, and I took the job an hour after leaving the building.
Wow. And what was it? What was it that resonated with you like that strongly?
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't so much the product. I mean, I live by sort of a philosophy of like founder first, business model second, because business models are fluid, can change, pivot. You can solve a problem that then turns out doesn't need solved, and you can move on to the next. But finding sort of hyper intelligent, hyper driven founders, at least in the UK and the EU, is actually quite challenging. I think it speaks to the fact that there's not many huge global success stories from Europe where there's a inundation from the US. And, I just remember from speaking to Nikolai there and then some of the team that he had sort of brought on before me, that there was just this relentless drive and ambition that I'd never seen in someone before. Like, this is going to be $1 trillion company. No one's going to get in our way. The sky's the limit. I don't understand what you do. Just come in and make it happen. All these sort of things that just resonated with me. Whereas when I speak to a lot of founders who are sort of, British and European, interview processes are very sort of blah, blah, very sort of fixed questions. And a lot of the time you're doing the selling as the candidate, when in actually it should be quite a shared responsibility, right? The company should really be selling. And Nick just did an immense job of selling, what this company was going to be. And he kind of had this attitude of like, join or don't join, I don't care, your loss. And rightly or wrongly, he just was someone I wanted to work with. And yeah, I left the building. I remember I had a bit of lunch and then I went to the tube station. And right as I got to the tube station, an hour later, the recruiter called me up and was like, yeah, they'd like to offer you the job. And without hesitation, I've never done this because I'm very much someone who likes to speak to my partner, think about things, digest it, but no hesitation, took it.
Wow. And what a founder to be influenced by in that interview.
Yeah.
And then the product, right? As a marketer, you're only really able to be as good as the product you have. What was the product like then? How did you know that that was a product that is worth pursuing?
I think that it was clear to me that there was product market fit from day one, purely on the basis of we'd all experienced the pain of going to another country and having to get cash out at the local bureau and dealing with exchange rates and all that nonsense. So the idea that you could just top up a card, go abroad and pay no fees was just very simple for me, and huge product market fit, especially in Europe, who are the biggest travelers in the world and so many different currencies and cross border issues. Um, but it would be fair to say, was that really enough? Was that like the ultimate amazing? Not many people would be like, yeah, I really want to work for a travel card company, right? But the reality is Nick already kind of had a grand plan. I think the way he used to word it was like he wants to be the Amazon of banking because everyone wants to be the something of something, right? It's how it goes. But he didn't sort of hesitate in saying, yeah, we're going to be the first global bank, no borders, operating in every country around the world. Money moves instantly, lowest fees, amazing UI, amazing UX. He just had it all penned out. And yeah, we're going to do stocks, and yeah, we might entertain crypto, and sort of all these things brought together. So it was less so. I saw the product market fit initially, which as a marketer is a flashlight above your head, and I knew I could work with it and scale it, but I was more excited for the meat that was really behind that and how basically add-ons and extensions. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, Revolut is kind of the only super app in Europe, right? To sort of not only talk that, but walk it in terms of making it a reality today.
Well, I was just thinking that all of the features you mentioned and some of the highlights of that roadmap you mentioned all kind of come true today. It's very rare that comes true and sort of plays out as you sort of look back and have given the founder time to build it, which is incredible.
Yeah, I think there was never any doubts in my mind internally that it could be done in terms of just the talent that we had, Revolut's reputation for moving at, immense speed. I think the only hesitation I had was, look, this is a highly regulated industry that doesn't like change and doesn't like people that think outside of the sort of ecosystem that they've developed. And that was my fear, this idea of, I remember when we were brainstorming the idea of allowing customers to buy crypto, I was all for it, part of the team to make it happen and bring it to market. But I was always sat there being like, oh, they're not going to like this in the FCA. And then stock trading came with that, and then you can see how it's sort of not slowed down in terms of additional features. So that obviously was a great thing, but it also creates a lot of problems for a marketer as well, because it's very easy if you're just a simple product and you're doing something to then take that to market and sell it. But when you're a product that has so many different features and use cases, and you're in so many different geographies, trying to make sure that you sort of market and target that effectively and hit the right triggers for people is challenging. So looks amazing, but creates far more challenges internally.
More of a marketer's headache. So that's that. That what I'm realizing the more and more I speak to teams that have achieved a lot is they're just used to taking on very difficult challenges. Like you mentioned, it's not just building and scaling a multifaceted product across multiple jurisdictions. You also have regulation to deal with.
Yeah.
What was it about that initial team? Because I imagine it wasn't huge. What was it about that initial team that worked?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I'd love to say that I went into Revolut with a grand plan of like, this is going to be the 12-month strategy. This is the team I need behind it, and I'm just going to execute that on day one. It was an entirely new industry for me, and I think the best marketers actually don't rush going in and hiring. They kind of go in, they look at the data they have, they speak to customers, they get a really good understanding of what the roadmap for the company looks like. They look at kind of what's been effective to date in terms of any sort of acquisition. And then they carefully plan, okay, this is the strategy. And that's the approach I wanted to take, was not sort of gunning it, but taking my time. And originally it was just myself, and then the team expanded to 3 people. So we had Grace and Kieran, um, and we were just generalists. We knew that we'd have to roll up our sleeves and do a bit of everything. So, we were working on community, we were working on PR, we had to maintain CRM, we had to go with new go-to-market product launches, we had to build engagement flows. It was, I think, hiring those sort of smart, ambitious graduates who don't want to be pigeonholed, who just want to go in and do different stuff kind of all the time. And I think that's kind of the beautiful essence of like an early stage team, is no one's really looking to be pigeonholed in that one area and do that one thing really well. They want to get their hands dirty and get involved in everything. And it was very much that Revolut mentality of get shit done, was pretty much what drove us to, as a very small team, to be hyper successful. But then in fairness, within about 6 months of that, the team then started to grow, and we started to understand which channels were effective, where we needed to focus, and so hiring made sense beyond that.
So you managed to keep a very small team until you really understood the business, and then you started to expand. But I remember so you're talking like a team of 3 or 4. How big were you able to get the audience with that team?
So with that people, we were able to get around that million user mark. I'd say, tell lie, there was maybe 4 people by that point, to the million user mark. And that was basically just utilizing about 3 core channels. So we weren't doing the classic thing of spreading ourselves too thin. It was very much a sort of growth mindset of like, let's A/B test this channel, see if it's effective, put a little bit behind it. If it's not, bin it, move on. And I think once we identified those 2 or 3 core channels, another thing we were very passionate about at Revolut was the idea of automation. So we didn't really want to have channels that were so dependent on manual labor, which is very time consuming. It was more about, can this channel scale? Can it be automated? Then freeing up someone to move on to the next thing. That was sort of the mindset we had towards growth channels.
And I think it's actually a mindset that kind of has been lost a bit as fintech's gone through this hyper scaling motion with huge VC rounds. Everyone needs a team now, right? But you were writing the copy for the ads. You're going running the community meetups.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, and I think it really just depends. I think on one hand, there's an element of ego, where a lot of people are motivated to hire as many people as they can in their team, because that will increase their importance within the company. I manage a big team, therefore I shouldn't be a director. I should be a VP or a C-suite. And that was more common on sort of more experienced people managers, if you can. But the way I look at it is, I'm such a cheap Scotsman, right? I have that proper Scottish DNA, which is like, I will save every penny and cut every cost I can. And whenever I look at a team, I just think, there's an operational cost for every person I hire, right? Which is their salary and anything ongoing for them to be there. I need to be able to justify that in the business. So that's why I've never sort of taken this approach of just, let's hire every core marketing function, bring someone in, and then they're going to want to hire 2 people. And then we've got this amazing machine. And in reality, that's not the case and not how it works. And that's often why you see so many mass layoffs, and marketing is often one of the number 1 hit areas, is because the right approach is to take it a little bit slow, really understand what is effective, truly effective, whether it's actually a scalable channel that will deliver sort of long-term revenue for the company. And then you can sort of take that business case to whoever signs off your hiring and saying, look, this isn't me just thinking, I want this person. This is me saying, I need this person, and here's why. Although you can argue with Revolut being 10,000 people today, that's maybe not the case anymore.
Yeah, and it comes down to that, being part of a business when it's from the start. I think you never lose that part of your DNA, because you understand that every single penny counts. It's amazing to see you, go on and scale that. I'd like to shift focus a little bit now, where you are one of the top marketers that has ever existed in fintech. And when we caught up before, you told me that actually 90% of marketers are shit. So I want to focus on what makes a good marketer, not to put you too much on the spot.
Yeah, slightly controversial. Maybe it's slightly less than 90%, but I can only speak from my own experience, and anyone who knows me knows I don't mince my words, right? I speak my mind. You love it or you hate it. Um, and I think there's several reasons for this. It's not just a singular thing. I think on one hand, I'd make the case that data has been the best and the worst thing for marketing. Um, on one hand, it's been the best because it helps us make informed decisions. We look at the data, there's logic as to why we invest money there or do this. It also helps us evaluate true performance, right? Particularly of performance channels, right? So there's no denying its huge benefits it's brought. You can argue marketing was very blind before data in the sense of we couldn't really justify what we were doing and people didn't appreciate the value that marketing brought, and that shifted drastically. But on the other hand, it's created effectively droids. Well, I just call them droids in marketing, which is these are people who are so dependent on data and copying and pasting what is the playbooks of the industry. They never innovate. They never think outside of the box. And it's why we're in this depressing state now where when you look at the technology industry, every brand is soulless. It looks the same, it speaks the same, it does the same marketing strategies, and it's just depressing. Like, when's the last time you can truly say you felt an affinity with a brand and it was unique and different and really reflected, how you felt or what you were as a person? So and I've interviewed thousands of marketers over the years, and I'm always looking for that wild person that's just, yeah, of course, I know the playbooks and I know the importance of data, but let me tell you about these fucking mental ideas I have. And that's what I really live for when I speak to a marketer. And it is so rare. It still shocks me to this day that when I interview people, they don't come to an interview ready to blow me away. Like, that's always my goal. If I'm raising funds, if I'm applying for a company, I know that I need that. I want that job and I need to make the lasting impression. So I'm going to go in there, not with a generic home task that they're going to give me that you can ace in your spare time, but I'm going to show from that first call that I'm the right person. And that's what comes from that truly sort of marketing creativity. And I think the other one is the two different types of marketers you get. I think one sort of you have the innovators and the settlers, right? And you need both at scale. Like, don't get me wrong, you need both. You can't just have a team full of innovators all the time because then you'll never have good process and things won't sort of maybe move along as neatly as they can. But you have the innovators who are the people who are always thinking, what's the next big channel? What's the next big thing? Who's the next user for us? They're always looking to the future and taking risks and taking bets and A/B testing everywhere. And then you have the settlers who, if you just have a team of settlers, you're just going to do the predictable stuff. They're the people who will just man the ship. They will take control of the area that they're an expert on and they will make sure it works and it plods along and it doesn't fail. But they're not the people that's really going to be sucking the most out of that channel and thinking how it innovates and grows from there. So you need both, but as an early stage company, I would always advise that you focus on that more innovator profile. And then as you sort of get to the Series A, maybe Series B stage, that's when you start to think about, okay, we've got the innovators, they're amazing, but they're messy, they're scrappy. We need some of those settlers to come in and make this more tight.
And how do you create that as a culture? Because I guess there's one thing is sort of hiring for that.
Mm.
And the second is how do you optimize that and kind of keep that alive within your team?
So it's fairly easy to do in an early stage in a small team because ultimately it's top down, right? So if you're the head of marketing, you're the CMO, you're the one cracking the whip and saying like, this is the culture, this is the process, this is how I want you to be. So when you're a team of maybe like 10, 12 people, you can maintain that, right? Where it becomes challenging is when you grow and expand as a marketing function and you have the CMO up here and then you have the heads below the CMO. Because what happens is you have that element of like tribalism where every team has their own culture and depending on who the manager of that team is will sort of shape and reflect the culture. So what I always try and do to avoid that is make sure that I set it early in terms of the culture in the beginning and make sure it scales with that founding marketing team. But then as you have to then start hiring more senior people to lead functions, you've got to make sure that the people that you're hiring reflect the same traits as you do, because you're not going to have time to micromanage their team, right? You're just going to be having check-ins with that person, making sure everything's happening. It's going to be their job to take your culture and filter it down into their team. So if you hire someone who's the polar opposite of you, who's overly fixated on bureaucracy and process and doesn't like risk taking and wants to be very vanilla, and that's not your style, it's not your identity as a company or as a brand, then you're going to have problems, right? So it's like with anything. As you scale, you just need to make sure you hire the right people.
Yeah. Well, you've certainly managed to do that during your time at Revolut. Do you have any good examples of, this question was all around what does good marketing look like? Have you got any great examples from your time at Revolut that sort of stands up to you as like, yeah, that's when we did something that I would class as good marketing?
I think quite a lot, and which sounds a bit arrogant, but I'll try and fly through them as quick as I can. But and this isn't all Chad, right? Let's be clear as CMOs as well. Is like you're often only as good as your team as well. So it's easy for me, someone like me, to hop on here and say this is all me, and in reality, there's a lot of people behind the scenes who make it happen. Even outside of marketing, the engineers, the data scientists, the product people who all support you. So squeeze that in, counter the arrogant statement. Um, I think one thing is, and look, other companies, I think Monzo did this really great as well, but the difference is Revolut was European wide and global. So I think we did it on a more difficult scale, but was just setting a new trend of tone of voice and brand in banking. It sounds generic, but the industry was just so formal, so corporate. Everything was very sleazy in terms of hiding the fees and what goes on behind the scenes. There was absolutely zero focus on the user. It was very much focused on profits, and there was zero focus on technology. And we changed all of that, right? Everything from our tone of voice, so the way we spoke to customers in emails was open, it was honest, it was transparent, it was fun. And our users loved that because they'd never experienced a financial product speaking to them like a normal person, or having a laugh with them, or sending them, a more informal style of communication. At the same time,
Um,
they also knew.
what
Sorry, go on.
Just on that, Chad, what's an example of that where you sort of realize, okay, this is working. This isn't just a nice to have. We've got a great tone of voice code. What's an example of you utilizing that tone of voice with your customers?
I think a couple. I think one was whenever we had an outage, so whenever we had an issue, i.e., our payment processor went down or something in our backend failed and customers couldn't make payments, or they couldn't send money, we owned it, right? It was very much the case of we need to get on this right away and fix it, but we need to focus immediately on communications to those customers. We need to explain to them that we're on it, we're aware of the issues, and we'll fix it. And what would happen is post issue, we would do like a post-mortem. So we would have a blog post that would get sent out to all customers explaining, here's what went wrong, here's how we fixed it, and here's how we're going to stop this from happening again. And I think most customers were just aware of like a little banner saying we're experiencing a maintenance issue, and then nothing. It would just be great, it's all back up again. We tried to really give users context as to what went wrong, what failed, how we're improving it. And I think that transparency just went a long way, because at the end of the day, you're trusting them, they're trusting you with their money. So it's not enough for us just to sit there and say, sorry, we had a problem, but everything's great now. Keep putting your hundreds or thousands of pounds into your accounts with us and trusting us with it. So I think that was quite refreshing. And again, I give a shout out to Monzo as well, because I think they did a great, Tristan and his team did a great job of that stuff as well. The other one was more risk-taking brandy stuff, which was like when Brexit happened, or was happening, we were very proactive in sending communications to our customers as to how this will impact them. Because remember, we had a lot of British customers, but we had a lot of customers in mainland Europe as well, millions. So it was really important they had the information that they needed to know how that will impact them. The long story is it didn't, because we had an entity in Europe and we had an entity in the UK, and we had an EMI license in both. But we saw that as an opportunity to have a little fun. So we sent this email out to users that basically was explaining what had happened, but we played with a lot of the words, like we mentioned, like don't panic, have a strawberry Macron, and there was all these little political statements in there. And it went, well, I say viral, it went fintech viral. So it was all over fintech, LinkedIn and Twitter, where people were loving it. There's always going to be a percentage where like this is very immature, and they didn't like it, that's okay. But most people just saw the funny side and were like, it's quite nice to see something a bit different and unique, and a bit of brand in there. So
Well, I think if any of our listeners are curious, they can Google it themselves, right? If you go and have a look at the Revolut Brexit email example,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is hilarious, but it's also just a great example of something that banks could not have done and probably still can't do today. Not just the speed, but the tone and the connection that ends up building with the customers.
Yeah, agreed. And it's not an easy thing to do, right? Because you need to scale that tone across your entire company, right? Every app screen, every email, every push notification, every customer service message. It's a difficult thing to do. But it was an important thing for us. And we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just the marketing team speaking that way, that the user did see that this was genuine and part of the company DNA. And I think in most areas we succeeded on that.
And there's some amazing sort of just marketing basics in there, right, as well, that like, how do you cut through, how do you be authentic, how do you use relevant, timely, top of mind trends that are impacting your audience?
100%. Yeah, like you said, it's sad, but we've lost faith and lost touch of the basics. Like a lot of the time, I speak to a lot of companies. I do a lot of advisory work now for venture-backed startups, and I'm often sat there saying, "Oh, so who's your user?" And I hear some generic thing like, "Oh, they're 25 to 30 and they live in big cities." And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. Who is your user? What's their interest? What are they like? Why are they with you? What motivates them?" And the amount of marketers who just don't think that granular of a user, they look at them as this like statistic. And the real and you see the brands that cut through the noise are the ones that really do take that more user-centric approach. Whereas if your approach is, no, I'm going to hire a bunch of performance marketers, we're going to send some ads out, do some SEO, you've only got yourself to blame when your churn just starts to go through the roof.
Of course. Well, I think any marketer that has got that sort of community base and community background really, really prioritizes the user very well. But let me just ask you quickly. I know you're very strong on the difference between a marketer and a growth person. Can you just define the difference between those two for you, and then kind of what looks good for both of those roles?
Yeah. I'm glad you said for you, because growth is such a fluid topic that depending on who you speak to, you'll hear a different definition. But I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about, and I know some of the best people in the industry who are doing it, and we all seem to align on this. So marketing is there's a marketing funnel, right? You have the top, middle, and the bottom of the funnel. A marketing team is 90% focused on top of funnel activities, right? So that's awareness and acquisition. So a lot of that's brand led, and some of the obvious functions are, you'll have your CRM in there, SEO, influencer marketing, brand, PR and comms, all those sort of top of funnel brand driven channels. Um, where growth comes into play is basically they take care of the more middle and bottom of funnel. So they're looking at retention and they're looking at monetization, right? They're the two things, right? How do we make sure these users stick around and we get the most out of them? And how do we make as much money as possible out of them as well? Now, marketing teams are always working on mid to long term roadmaps, right? You're building a brand, you're developing it. So you're going to have there with, 6 to 12 month roadmaps in place of what you're trying to develop and build and why. Whereas a growth team is operating purely on experimental and sprints, right? So they're working on monthly roadmaps or maybe quarterly roadmaps, right? At the most. So their job is not to sit there and put this long strategy together and work on something for 12 months. It's no, how do we absolutely maximize this channel? How do we maximize this user, sorry, how do we increase revenue by 20% this year, because that's our North Star metric. So marketing and growth will often work closely together, but a growth team is typically quite small in size. What you'll typically find is there'll be some growth marketers, there will be some engineers, front and back end, and there will be a data scientist, because growth is a very data-driven channel, right? It's kind of the opposite of marketing, where it's like without data, it's very risky to kind of do anything, because you could burn a lot of money or make a fatal mistake. And when you look at the growth talent, most heads of growth do not come from a marketing background. In fact, the best ones do not. They actually come from a product or data background, because the job is so analytical and it's often so product driven, because almost every tech company is product driven, right? Whether it's referrals or sales funnels, that's what they're going to be working on. So it's more of a technical team. It's a small squad. They operate in short sprints and experiments, and they come from a product and data background. If you are a marketer, stop calling yourself growth. No one's buying it, and anyone smart will be able to assess almost immediately that you are a marketer. And it's not to say that there aren't people who can't do both. I've very much been a marketer most of my career, but in the last 3 to 4 years, I've been more focused on growth. So I'm finding myself now as a hybrid in the middle, which I think is incredible, because at the same time, one of the downsides in marketing, going back kind of to your question around, 90% of marketers are being shit. I criticize the technical marketers and the performance marketers for not having any creativity, no innovation. But I equally criticize creatives who are not very analytical and not very technical, because then they're failing themselves. Because I think every marketer should strive to be firmly in the middle, where you are creative and that is the bread and butter of your sort of thinking, but at the same time you know what to measure and why. You know how to, you know how to track, you know how to sell in something, you know how to build data to build your case. You make sure that you have tracking everywhere. And a lot of creatives don't know how to do that, and that's where they let themselves down. So I think both kind of need to come together and leverage each other's skills. And I
Well,
should,
I think it.
yeah.
Sorry, go on. You go.
No, I was just going to say, the other thing is growth and marketing work very closely together, but growth sits within a product function. It doesn't sit, marketing is a standalone function, and there will be a dotted line between growth and marketing because there's a huge amount of collaboration there and shared resource. But growth will always predominantly sit in product because their goals are almost identical, a product team and a growth team, right? Which is, how do we launch great features? How do lots of people use them? And how do we make money? And product teams have the engineers and the product designers to make that happen. So that's high level anyway, the right format.
But I think to me, it's just I find it interesting that it kind of matches your just general philosophy. Getting to know you more is like the problem that you have when you separate marketing away from products and anything further down the funnel is you kind of reach this point where where we were talking about if you don't have a great product, you can't be a great marketer. Whereas knowing what you're like, all you care about is revenue. Are we impacting the bottom line? So if you can, have that toolkit of being a growth marketer, you actually can start solving problems that you learn about at the top of the funnel, but actually the solution sits further down in product.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you have to remember as well, like the North Star metric always moves different based on the stage of the company. So when you go into an early stage company, 9 times out of 10, it's not about revenue, it's about acquisition and retention. Because people often say, well, what is product market fit? In my opinion, product market fit can only be defined by retention, right? If your users are being acquired and they're good quality, they're cheap, they're going through the funnel and then they are churning, you have a product market fit issue, right? It's not solving the problem you think it is. It's not clear on what the value props are. There can be loads of analysis done on why it is, but that's the goal. So I often say early stage CMOs don't get bogged down on thinking about revenue so early, because I really think you'll kill innovation and you'll kill acquisition. Focus on that brand building, focus on the acquisition, focus on the retention, prove that you have a sticky product and it's stuff that people want. And then when you hit that critical mass, whatever you define that to be internally, whether it's 1 million users or 500K, then you're in a position to say, okay, now we need to be thinking about revenue monetization. So maybe we're going to hire a head of growth to come in and do that, or maybe we'll try and figure it ourselves internally. So trying to do full funnel from day one as an early stage startup is 9 times out of 10 a house fire, right? You're just spreading yourself too thin and you're going to fuck it all up. So understand what the core metrics are now, and 90% of the time, acquisition and retention, which gets you to that key funding round that you need, and then you can start to think about the rest of the funnel.
Well, talk us through those phases of growth through the lens of your time at Revolut. Like, what's your advice to CMOs or startup CMOs at these different phases? So, what are the set of tactics that get you from 0 to 100,000 or a million users, and what are the set of tactics that go from 1 to 5 to 10 million users?
Yeah, so it's a real open question because it really does depend on the kind of business you are, industry you're in. I guess what might be more helpful is how we did it at Revolut, which is how did we grow, right? Now, the strategy from Revolut was always defined pretty early on of how we will acquire the first million users and how we will go from 1 to 5 million users. Now, the logic was 1 million users is going to be organically driven and it's going to be community driven, right? And what we mean by community now, you speak to a lot of companies, they'll give you these bullshit definitions where it's like a glorified social media support person. That is not community. Community is about ownership, right? Which is, how do we make sure that our customers are so evangelist towards the company and they are so committed to the company that they will effectively do our marketing for us, right? They were the ones that will help us go from 1 million to 2 million. And that was always the goal on the board that we had in the room. And we did this in a number of ways, right? So getting that first like 10K users was just a lot of growth hacking, right? PR, contacting people who worked in airline industries like stewards and pilots because they travel all the time. doing some cheap affiliate ads on like Money Saving Expert for like travel cards, because that was like not even a thing back then. It was cheap as chips. That's how we sort of hustled, doing sort of multi-testing to get that first like 10K in. And then the logic was, okay, how do we now make these people so feel that as if they're really part of the business? So the first thing we did was crowdfunding. Um, Monzo liked to think theirs was the most successful. Ours was, uh, factually. But we basically did 2 rounds. We did the first round, which was we let our customers become investors. The logic was if they have a slice of the pie and they're financially set to benefit from our growth, they will want us to grow. They will help us grow, right? Because they're going to financially benefit. So that was one thing. Let's make our early users investors. Step two was okay, we want to launch true Revolut style. We want to launch these 100 things in the next 100 months, but 3 months. But how do we prioritize what we build and why? And I was the one in the room saying, well, let the fucking users decide. They're using the product. Why are we deciding internally? So that's what we did. We put our product roadmap live. We sent it out privately to all of our power users, however many thousands it was at the time, and they got to essentially upvote and downvote what we build in the next 3, 6, and 12 months. So they were sort of sat there thinking, okay, I have ownership in this company. I have a real say in the direction of the company and what they build and why. We also let them name our products. So whenever we were launching something new, they got to name them. Um, and then we also ran events. So we went to all of their key cities like London, Paris, Berlin, where they got to come in, meet the team, hear great panel discussions and presentations over beer and pizza. And we ran these on Recycle every quarter all over Europe. So they were getting to actually meet the team as well. And then suddenly they felt as if they were really part of something, right? And that was perfect. So by doing that, as well as some of the growth hacking on PR and other channels, we got to that first million users. And then our view was, okay, well, now we need to flick on the referral machine, right? Because what should happen now is these highly engaged, loyal users should now start referring their friends based on the value of the products, and we can kind of sit back a little bit. Now, the first time we actually didn't have budget, and I often believe that when you run a referral campaign, you should try it organic before you give a reward, because it really test how loyal your users are and do they need to be incentivized financially to do it. And we ran a campaign and we sent this highly sort of engaged tone of voice that was like, we've made you an investor, we've met you, we let you decide what we build. All that we ask in return is that you help spread the word. I went, look, we've got money, we can go and blow it on ads and tubes and things like this, but that's money taking away from the product and from your experience. It was really that heart to heart. And I think we phrased it from Nikolai, the founder, to the users. And I think it was something like nearly like 400,000 referrals happened throughout that campaign, because you can
Wow.
refer as many people as you wanted, right? So it was so human, it was so engaged. We really kind of tried to connect with them on an emotional level, and we justified why. We reminded them of the value that Revolut was bringing them as a product, and that this is the least they can do. They're not paying for this, right? But then there were so many more like funnels in the way. So then we continued to grow via. We did another referral campaign after that, and the logic was you had to invite 2 friends to invest in this one. So we grew astronomically from that due to the demand of people wanting to invest. We did things like when you're overseas and you make a payment with Revolut, you can split a bill. So we knew that chances are they will have at least one other person with them. So we'd send them automated pushes and emails saying, hey, if you get them all on Revolut, one person can pay and you can all tap and split the bill. We reminded them that. So all these sort of things, a lot of it was just based on emotional community connectivity, but the other side of it was quite smart, based on like the user's actual engagements, where they were, what they were doing, and how we would prompt them with similar communications.
Well, I think again, keep coming back to sort of the basic principles that you really got so right. Like, community building is about participation. It's not about having an audience that just receive comms from you.
Yeah.
And then, how do you make the messaging that you send to them both in line with their own incentives but relevant? And that's such a perfect example of a group of people sat on holiday in Italy around a table splitting a bill. One of them has their Revolut card out, the others don't. What a perfect moment for a referral.
Yeah, 100%. And like there was so much more. I could sit here all day about the strategies we did and channels that took off, but the real core of Revolut's growth, the real success behind Revolut's growth, was that community to referral roadmap and how it was
Yeah.
very much designed to be that way. And even when you look at Revolut today, its number one channel is still referrals. Granted, they're paying for them now and quite a lot, but it still is. And again, to your point as well, I have to say a lot of it is also testament to a great product, right? There's
Yeah.
no denying the fact it's a great product that solved a great need. So our job has made that little bit easier in terms of convincing people to get on board.
Exactly, because it all falls apart. If you don't have a good product, then you don't get that organic engine. Then you start layering on paid referrals and any paid marketing.
There you go.
You're just throwing money down a pit. Now, one of the questions that you asked me to ask you, not to focus too much on your triumphs, was what your biggest fuck ups have been in your career. What are the biggest lessons that you've come back from and want to share with our audience?
Yeah, buckle up. I'm someone who loves failures. You cannot be an innovator without fucking up. And every fuck up I do, I like to think I learn from it sometimes. But I think it's important that I've learned more from my failures than I have my success, right? Um, I think touching on referrals, because we made a number of, it sounds amazing, right? We grew to 10 million users basically from referrals and community marketing, but there was a lot of learnings along the way. The first one is we didn't do a good enough job in fraud proofing referrals. So how do we ensure that people are not going to take advantage of this? The added challenge that Revolut had is we operated in markets in Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe, where fraud and scams are just a bit more prevalent than they are in other markets. And we had one issue whereby people were effectively bidding on Google Ads with their referral links to get people to sign up. And then we were looking at some users who were making like, I don't know, 2 grand a week. And I'm like, how is that possible? No one has that many friends. And they were just gaming it. We kind of sat there
Wow.
and went, to be honest, fair play. Like they're still getting signups. But obviously, that's not particularly fair. And we should be the ones bidding and trying to acquire people organically. So that's something we identified and we were able to then bring to a stop. The second one was not having a good enough call to action. So we started off originally by saying all the other person has to do is sign up, KYC, and order a card, right? So we weren't actually asking them to do anything, to top up, to fund, to make a payment, things that actually generate revenue for us or generate engagement. So what we found is a lot of people were basically just getting their friends and family to sign up and order a card, but then they were never making a payment and they were never going to be engaged users. So we basically ended up paying for a lot of really shit quality users. This was more the later stage of referrals, the sort of post 10 million. How we fixed that was we then attributed a card payment to it, right? So you had to fund and then make a payment, and then the money would be released, the €10 or whatever you were going to get. Another one was not taking into account the incentive required based on GDP of a country. So we would look at the UK, Germany, France, where you kind of have to offer €10, €20, right? You need to offer the sort of industry standard. But then we were applying that same logic to markets where that's a huge amount of money, or that's way higher than any average in that country for a referral there. So take markets like Poland, Romania, offering €10 was really incentivizing. So we were effectively overpaying for users when after some testing, we realized that €2-3 was just as effective. People were still referring their friends for that amount. So there was a good learning there of look at the local market conditions, look at GDP, look at what other companies are doing in that market, and don't just apply a one size fits all copy and paste approach to the reward and the incentive. So that's just some referral ones. I think another was I mentioned before that I'm all about being bold, being risky. I know that some will fuck up and don't. And, I had no shortage of campaigns that some people just didn't like. Now, 9 times out of 10, most humans are decent people and don't really give a shit, right? And they find some things funny. And if they don't find something funny, it's fine. But you like everything, you always have a vocal minority who take to Twitter and blah, blah, blah. But, everyone will remember the tube campaign that Revolut did on like Valentine's Day, which sort of used data or high level data anyway to sort of poke fun at different sort of people. Again, a lot of people found it funny, a lot of people didn't, but what can backlash from that is all it takes is a few people on Twitter to, tweets, and then journalists start getting in touch and running narratives. Now, my team were lucky in the sense that I very much would be like, it's okay, this stuff happens, and I guarantee you in 3 days it's all forgotten about. And 9 times out of 10, that's it. So my advice to marketers as well is like, stick to your convictions. if you really do think you fucked up, and it's evident based on the data that you fucked up, which for us it wasn't. Everything was massively up. We looked at sentiment analysis online to get people's views. It was very much mixed. It wasn't really a major fuck up. I think we had to kind of just say, look, there's strengths, there's pros and there's cons to this campaign, and we'll learn from it. But I think sticking to your convictions is quite important, because I have had to give advice to a number of marketers who maybe something hasn't quite gone to plan, or there's been, one negative article come out about it and they buckle, and then they're really scared to then be as creative as they are, or test again and be bold, because they're afraid that that's going to damage their reputation or the company. So stick to your convictions, be bold, and there's no shortage of brands that do it, whether it's your Paddy Powers of the world who are always going out there and most people love it and they're controversial, or maybe it's the early days of Brewdog when they used to drive tanks and stuff on the streets and all this kind of stuff. It's as long as it's not a one-hit wonder and you stick to it and it's really part of your brand DNA, people will respect it, even if they may not like it per se. The other thing I would say, I'd say this was kind of a bit of my downfall at Revolut, to be honest. In the last year, it's kind of when I realized it wasn't for me, and I think probably vice versa, was when you are more of an individual contributor, so you're more of like a hands-on CMO, it's sometimes easy to forget all the stuff you have to do beyond execution. And what I mean by that is making sure that you have great process. So every team has clear roadmaps and clear dashboards, and they have ticketing services if people need to request assets and all this kind of stuff. That you're forecasting for your budget. You're not just focusing on this year and what the budget is for this year and what the return is, but you're also looking ahead. Likewise with hiring, you're thinking about what hiring you're going to need in the next 6 months, because hiring is very hard and very long. And if you leave it too long, you really mess yourself up. And that's things I was victim to. I didn't want to sit there and do fucking bureaucracy, right? My view is there's no get a pencil head to come in and do all this, right? And it was kind of made clear to me. It's like, well, no, you kind of have to prove you can do it before, someone else comes in and does it for you, which was a very fair and valid point. And it's interesting. So I really let myself down there, which is just make sure you don't get caught up in the now, and you are always thinking about strategically the future, making sure you're building good process, because the risk is you can grow super fast and do amazing work, but then it can so quickly come crumbling down when you don't have the foundations set up around you. But just don't make the mistake of going too far in that direction, because then suddenly you become the bureaucratic people manager and you're no longer the inspirational leader that everyone really wants to follow.
Well, it's so hard, isn't it? Because you can guarantee that the reason behind your success is that you were a doer, you were hands-on, and you were very focused in the moment. If you think of, I'm not sure if you can put it into scale, but how many people were you hiring at Revolut during that period?
I mean, I think I grew my team up to about 25, 30 people in the end. In terms of hiring, I did hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews in that time.
And if you think of sort of the millions of customers that are being onboarding, there's very little time to start thinking about, okay, what does my own org structure look like? What do my reporting lines look like? How many one-to-ones have I got set up? Who's got the right budget allocation? What's our roadmap going to be like? How is the cross-functional communication going?
Literally. I mean, I worked 7 days a week. I worked 14-hour days. I barely took holidays. Like, I don't regret it for a minute. Like, the ride was insane. I mean, like, in addition to making sure I'm running a fully functional marketing function, I had to handle all the communications function, and Revolut was not shy of having crisis and lots of issues going on. I was the one behind the scenes having to deal with all that crisis management and reputational management. I was then responsible for our go-to-markets, so launching Revolut in every country. So I was often flying to Singapore, Australia, US. So I think I sort of just buckled under there. But I think one thing I should have done earlier was hiring managers below me to take care of a lot of that day to day. I was trying to
Yeah.
be this jack of all trades and the fearless leader and do everything and prove that I can do this mammoth job. And all it would have really taken was for me to just take a step back and think, actually, I can hire 3 people below me. I can really split this all up. And then that's going to free me up to do what I'm good at without me getting bogged down on all the rest of the stuff. So it's
Well,
difficult
I
to
think
do, but I think you can reflect on it and you can, you know, do it. But I think another issue I didn't have that I should have done earlier was I didn't have a mentor. I think a lot of good early stage CMOs have a mentor, someone they can really learn from. Maybe I was a bit arrogant in thinking I didn't need one, but I feel like that would have potentially solved a lot of pains that I experienced as well.
Well, I was going to say it's great that you're now advising companies and sort of giving that back. Chad, I just want to finish up here on your recent transition into the world of crypto.
Yeah.
How did that happen? I know it aligns with your values, but talk to us a bit about that, and then would love you to spend some time talking about, okay, what are the unique challenges around crypto that come to mind that's different from dealing with fintech and financial services?
Yeah, good question. Look, I think the reality is I was really lost after leaving Revolut because when you go from being on a rocket ship journey like that, you want it again. You got a little bit of the dopamine and you want it again. And there's not many Revoluts in the world, especially in Europe, right? So trying to get the next bet right in terms of which company or which industry to go in is actually pretty challenging. And most people make a few mistakes, or it's why a lot of people then just become founders because they don't know what that is. They're going to try and do it themselves and figure it out themselves. For me, I went into crypto not as a tourist. And I say a lot of people went from fintech to crypto, right? A lot of people because it was the next big thing. I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because it did align with my values. This idea of decentralization, of banks and financial institutions having less, not being able to shut your account because they don't like a tweet that you put out expressing your political view. So I really sort of resonated with that aspect of decentralization. Um, and that's the reason I joined. I think equally what Argent was building is basically the Revolut of DeFi. So there was a lot of similarities, which is it wants to be this singular app, this wallet that also has the best of DeFi in it with amazing UX, UI, phenomenal security, and that's what they've done. So it was sort of, I really want to get into this industry. It's really taking off. It's so interesting. At the same time, crypto is so technical. Like banking is a piece of piss, right? To understand how things work, banks have done a great job of making it sound so complicated. Banking is the easiest thing to get your head around. And what's interesting is fintech didn't change banking. There's this myth that everything was changed. They're just doing it faster, cheaper, with a better user experience. The way that money actually still moves and all the tech behind it is pretty much still the same. Whereas crypto was very much redefining the technical stack that goes behind financial services. So
So
that,
as a
yeah.
I was just going to say, as a CMO, someone that's trying to lead the marketing function of that difficult and more complex product and infrastructure, what are some of those challenges that come up that are completely separate to the world of fintech?
A lot. So the first thing we have is just the reputation that elements of crypto have got around scams, right? We unfortunately we've had people that were very trusted and ran incredible companies like FTX, who really set the industry back a long time in terms of being able to trust putting your assets into those into crypto companies once again. Now that is healing, and you can see that from the TVL in the industry. But that reputation has been huge work to basically get people to be able to trust this industry after some big characters messed it up. The second one is the issue of understanding true metrics. We have two things in the crypto industry that's tough. One is bots. So you might think that you have 50 individual customers who have all just made a trade, when in reality it's one bot that's a bunch of bots that have done it 50 times, created 50 different wallets and done it. It's not, so it's basically one person, not 50 people. And trying to really not get lost in hyperinflated data is important, so that you're not chasing the wrong metrics, but you're actually understanding who are our true genuine users here and what are these bots just messing up all of our stats. That's a challenge. The second one is what the industry calls farmers. These are, generally speaking, people who are only in crypto in the hope of getting an airdrop or a token. So they're purely in it to use your product or go on this chain and use it just in the hope that they drop a token and they make a few $100. Because a lot of these people are from developed or third world countries where getting $300 is a yearly salary, right? So one airdrop is amazing, amazing for them. So trying to make that distinguish between a real genuine user that is there for the technology and there for the product versus the bots and versus the farmers, and basically trying to cast that to one side so that you stay focused on true metrics and true performance.
And how do you solve that as a marketer?
Um, I'd be a very rich man if I knew the answer to that.
But like, where do you focus?
You have to try and focus on that genuine user. And it might not be the biggest number. It might look tiny compared to the number of farmers that you have, but rest assured that genuine user is going to be the one that refers friends. They're going to be the ones that has a higher wallet balance, who makes you more revenue, who uses your product. Whereas the person that's farming is going to do the absolute minimal just so that they're on their on-chain data to qualify for something in the future. So it's about staying grounded, keeping focused on what's actually important, and understanding that crypto is still a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's still a developing industry. There's still a hell of a lot that needs to happen for it to, truly compete with a centralized financial industry. And I think a lot of companies just try and sprint it, get as much sort of bloated metrics as they can, drop a token, and then job done. Companies like Argent are genuine Web3 companies that are here for the long run, building sustainable product and sustainable industries. And yeah, it's just a challenge to get a share of voice from the bigger companies who seem to dominate the industry, whether it's your Coinbases or Binances of the world.
Well, I can totally see why you're the guy for the job there. From everything that we've spoken about, you've got a real natural understanding of like just the basic key principles of marketing. In a world where the data is murky, you've got a good understanding of growth and that product. And it seems like there's an important space for sort of that brand and community building as well. So I'm very excited to see what you continue to do at Argent. Now, if we could finish on your biggest lesson. So, the people listening to this are marketers, CMOs, product builders in fintech and financial services. What's the one lesson that you think they could take away from this in order to become successful?
God, it's hard to say one thing in it, but I would say probably the one lesson is to be is adaptability. I think it's sometimes very easy for marketers and CMOs in particular to be so stuck in their ways um, that they fail to change as the company changes. It's why you often see a lot of people that go into early stage startups, they don't pass the test of time, right? They're maybe there for the first 3, maybe 4 years, and then someone else comes in to take over. And a large sort of reason for that is people, CMOs don't adapt as the company grows, because the kind of CMO you need in year 1 to 4 is 9 times out of 10 not the one you need in 4 to 8. So if you're able to adapt and become that new CMO that the company is going to need, and a prime example would be is you're so focused on acquisition and awareness, you're amazing at brand building, you've really tested channels, built a great brand, but you've spent absolutely zero time really focused on the science of engagement and then looking at revenue. And then it's going to be very hard for a founder or a board to have confidence that you're the right person to lead them going forward if you haven't demonstrated that you can develop that. So that's what I mean by being a sort of adaptability is, doing what you need to do in the early days, but making sure that you are building the right process and strategy that you are going to basically grow with the company, not grow apart from it. I hope I explained that well, but it's basically most CMOs downfall in pretty much every tech company that goes on to scale.
Amazing. Well, Chad, thank you so much for your time today. Like I said, watched you with, hyper focus at the early stages of my fintech career and continue to do so through the next stage. So thank you so much for your time and I wish you the best.
Yeah, likewise. Good to be here. Thank you.